the healthy ways of eating and the healthy ways of exercising. So, binge eating disorder is actually the most common eating disorder in the United States. It's where people will eat tons of food at once in a short amount of time. So, like a whole buffet in 10 minutes. But they do this due to an underlying mental illness, so another mental illness, such as depression or anxiety. So how we can help people with binge eating disorder is to first help them with their other mental illness, like depression or anxiety, and then after we help them with that, we can teach them the healthy ways of eating, exercising, so we can help them feel better. So addiction. So 1 in 7 people have a substance addiction, and that's usually what you think of when you think of addiction. But there's more than just substance addiction. Substance addiction is things like drugs or things that you wouldn't normally put in your body. There's also behavioral addictions, such as eating or gambling, and a very relevant new one is actually extremely common now, is video game addiction. So when people have an addiction, when they do this thing, take this thing, eat the thing, they just feel good. It brings dopamine to their brains, and it's like, yeah, this feels good, and maybe it's a way to escape something else. But then they become reliant on it, and they can't stop, and they keep going for it over and over again. So there's many ways you can help people with an addiction. There's addiction recovery centers and many other things. So PTSD affects about 8 million Americans, and PTSD stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. It can happen to anybody at any age who has experienced any form of traumatic event. And a lot of the times when you think of PTSD, you'll think of people who served in the military. And it does affect a lot of people who served in the military. But it can also affect people who are victims of violent crimes, who were abused as a child or abused at any age. It can affect anybody. And it will cause triggers. Triggers will cause flashbacks. And we'll explain more about what triggers are because it can affect any mental illness. But triggers can cause flashbacks. Flashbacks is when somebody feels that they are back exactly at that moment, the thing that caused the PTSD, the traumatic event. So the best way to treat PTSD is to see a mental health professional. Anxiety. Everyone has anxiety in stressful situations. It's part of human nature. It's the flight or fight response, right? And generalized anxiety disorder is actually the most common anxiety disorder in the United States. So anxiety can be caused by an overwhelming amount of anything. And it's not even just an overwhelming amount of stress. An overwhelming amount of happiness can lead to anxiety as well. And it can cause physical symptoms such as stomach aches, severe headaches, dizziness. Extreme anxiety may lead to panic attacks. Now, there's a difference between a panic attack and an anxiety attack. An anxiety attack lasts longer. It lasts like a week or longer. And it's when, like, you'll get it once in a while and, like, your heart will start racing and your mind's racing and you're just worried about everything and you're sweating and, like, you're like, oh my god, and then you have trouble sleeping and you're just worried about everything. That's an anxiety attack. A panic attack is short but scary. You'll feel paralyzed. You'll be shaking and trembling. You might need to be hospitalized. You might faint. You might not be able to move. That's a panic attack. So understanding why it's there is another thing with anxiety. A lot of the time when we get anxious, we have trouble knowing why we're anxious. So when this happens, just talk to somebody about it, because just worrying about why you're anxious makes you more anxious. And if you talk to somebody, they might be able to figure out what's making you anxious. Depression is a very common mental illness, especially amongst teenagers. So depression is a mood disorder, and it's more than sad. It's a sense of worthlessness, like you're nothing. People who have depression will lose interest in the things they love. Maybe this person has been playing baseball since they were like 10, and all of a sudden they stopped playing, and they were like the best person on the team, and then they stopped coming to school, and they stopped showering. That's depression. And physical symptoms may include loss of appetite, headaches, stomach aches, change in behaviors. Especially amongst teenagers, depression might come out as anger, and they might be like very angry and like yelling at people, and they usually don't act that way. So, trigger warning. So you might be asking, what's this, Abby? Well, I'm going to explain. Triggers. Triggers can cause PTSD flashbacks, self-harm. It's more than just cutting. There's other ways, but attempting suicide, panic attacks, any type of feeling to the extreme, anxiety, depression, sadness, anger, hyperactivity, fear, etc., harming others. It can cause anything very negative. Things that can cause triggers are reminders of trauma, something anxiety-provoking for that particular person, and remember, anything can be anxiety-provoking for different people. Something someone has a phobia of. So how can we help? You can use trigger warnings on sensitive topics on social media, such as, like in this, I put a trigger warning before each of the slides that I'm talking about sensitive things, so people can skip to the times where I'm not talking about it. And you can use something like this. You can use that. And if you don't like that, you can draw your own. Or you can just put TW, trigger warning, mentions of self-harm, mentions of suicide, different things like that. It can save a life. It can help a lot of people. So, trigger warning. Now I'm going to be talking about intrusive thoughts. Intrusive thoughts. What are those? Well, a lot of people experience intrusive thoughts. 4 out of 5 people have intrusive thoughts. Intrusive thoughts are unwanted thoughts that say things that you would not think, and they just show up out of nowhere. And they are scary. But the best way to deal with them is to acknowledge that the thought is there, then try to dismiss it. Don't fight it. Because if you fight it, then it will fight you back and just make it worse. So just say, oh, there it is, and then continue doing what you're doing, because then it will just give up. So, trigger warning, the next slide mentions auditory hallucinations and visual hallucinations. So, voices and visions, which are auditory hallucinations and visual hallucinations, come with some mental illnesses, such as schizophrenia or multiple personality disorder. So the reason I put this is because I found this thing online. You see the picture there? It says, I hate having to tell people about my mental illness. It's so heartbreaking when they don't want to talk to me anymore just because I have auditory and visual hallucinations. Now, that's rude. If they're not doing anything wrong to you, why would you stop talking to them just because they have auditory and visual hallucinations? It's not their fault. It's part of their illness. So, trigger warning, I am going to be talking about self-harm. So, self-harm is an unhealthy coping mechanism that people go to when they feel there's nothing else to do. So the best way is to get therapy, maybe some medications, but seeing a trusted psychiatrist or someone like that will help the best. But if you know someone who is self-harming and like you're a teenager, please let a trusted adult know who can find them help so they can stop. So, trigger warning, I am going to be talking about suicide. So, suicide. There's a difference between having a suicidal thought and acting on those thoughts. Suicide is the second leading cause of death in 15 to 29-year-olds around the world. About 1 million people commit suicide each year. This means every 40 seconds, one person commits suicide. For each person who commits suicide, 20 people attempt to do so. So suicidal thoughts can come in different forms. They can come as intrusive thoughts, voices, or an actual thought someone believes. And people who are suicidal may joke or talk about suicide a lot. And if they are, they could mean it. So if you have a concern that someone might try to commit suicide, please tell a trusted adult. So I really like the idea of Project Semicolon. I like what they stand for. I think it's really cool. So a semicolon in the sentence, it is a pause. It's a break between two independent clauses. So you have your first independent clause, the semicolon,